Hi, everyone. So this is chapter 10, interpersonal communication in close relationships. And you all know me by now, so our next slide is a quote. Communication to a relationship is like oxygen to life. Without it, it dies. So let's say that again. Communication to a relationship is like oxygen to life. Without it, it dies. And in today's lecture, we will take a look at intimacy, the different dimensions of intimacy, what our communication is like in our family of origin, and how that impacts the types of relationships that we form later in our life with our friends, with our colleagues, and with our romantic partners. So moving on to the next slide, we'll take a look at intimacy. And intimacy is really defined as a state of closeness that you have with another individual. And the way in which we express intimacy are really through four main dimensions, according to social scientists. The first is physical, and physical intimacy, we know that is extremely important to the development of children. So literally, children need to be touched, their heads need to be touched in order for the neural pathways to be developed. You need to hold when a baby is crying. You need to hold the baby. You need to rock the baby, to soothe the baby. So we know that this physical touch is extremely important. And then throughout our lives, physical touch is also very important to individuals. Sexual intimacy is also part of the physical dimension. And then later, as we get older, oftentimes we don't have as many friends. Perhaps the spouse has died and we are not as physically close to people. So this is oftentimes a dimension of intimacy that is lacking for a lot of older people in our culture. The next one is intellectual sharing. And in this dimension, it's an exchange of ideas that counts as intimacy. And let's say you have a friend that you often debate with, and you'd love to have a really good argument with this friend, and it really gets you excited. That's an aspect of intimacy, and it's a way of sharing intellectually your ideas with another person. It could be a friend, it could be a romantic partner, it could be a family member, or maybe that uncle that comes to dinner on Christmas, that uncle that you like to debate politics with, you get really excited to see, even though you two disagree, but it's your uncle and you can have fun intellectually sharing with that person. The third is emotional, and it's when we self-disclose our feelings to create and maintain relationships with other people that can express a shared connection with an individual. So that's another form of intimacy. And then finally, shared activities. Doing things with people can bring us closer to them. So if you go on a golf trip with someone, with your friends, that shared activities that can bring you closer, or you go to a concert with friends, that's a form of a shared activity that can help create closer, tighter bonds with other people. And moving on to our next slide, intimacy and close relationships. This is Enzo. He doesn't want to be here, but I thought he'd say hi to you all. Say hi, Enzo. Say hi. He's not going to say anything. Okay. So as I'm being intimate with my little fur baby here, so you can see him. Okay, so the next one is cultural influences on intimacy. We do know that culturally we express intimacy different in some countries and in some cultures than in others, and similar in some countries than in others. But some of the cultural influences on intimacy include some of the expectations that we have in more individualistic cultures versus collectivistic cultures. There have been studies done at the difference between kind of East and West, and some of the greatest differences that researchers found were in Asian cultures versus European cultures, and how people express public affection, sexual intimacy, how people express privacy. So there are some cultural influences on intimacy that do factor into how we communicate with people and how we express our intimacy with them. We also know that some of the cultural influences on intimacy in the United States, according to the research by Kurt Lewin, social psychologist, he stated that in the United States, people are really easy to meet and will accept you into the group really easily, but they are very difficult to get to know because people don't like to express their political or religious beliefs, or perhaps their deep personal values. They don't like to express to other people for fear of perhaps saying the wrong thing or people not agreeing, and then they would hate to have conflict. versus in a culture like Germany, where it's pretty difficult to meet people. It's pretty difficult to become part of the in-group, but once you do, you really get to know that person, because people are much more likely to share their political and religious beliefs, their deep values. They're much more likely to share them. With regards to intimacy and mediated communication, if you look on page 317 of your textbook, the movie Her, which is actually a movie that is on your film list if you would like to watch that one, talks about how intimacy and mediated communication is possible. This particular gentleman falls in love with a software program with artificial intelligence. So is that possible? Can we be intimate in mediated forms of communication? So only you know the answer to that. But according to social scientists today, they would say, yes, you can. But if you would have asked them that same question 30 years ago, they would have said, no, impossible. And then finally, we do know that there are some limits on intimacy. So it isn't possible to have a relationship with every person that you meet. It's just not possible. You wouldn't want to have a close relationship with every person that you meet. And you also want to be mindful that not every person in your life is going to be able to meet every dimension of intimacy. So you have to cut people some slack. So your romantic partner, you might be able to have the physical and the emotional intimacy, but maybe you don't have shared activities. And if that's something that's important to you, maybe you do shared activities with your friends. So it's important to understand that there are some limitations of intimacy, and we can't expect one person to meet all of our needs with regards to intimacy. Moving on to communication in families. So when you think of the word family, what comes to mind? Do you have really warm, positive images? Do you have really negative images? Or do you have a little bit of both? Probably for most of us, we have a little bit of both. It's important to understand how your family of origin communicated, because that in turn can tell you a lot about the types of relationships that you form with people and how you communicate with people, and whether or not the relationships that you form with people, are they healthy or unhealthy? Are they anxious? Are they secure? So it's really important to kind of understand and take a look at how your particular family communicated. So there are many different types of families today. We have blended families. We have families that are biological fully. We have some families that aren't biological. So we have so many different types of families today. And like I said, communication in your family of origin, it's formative in the sense where the messages that you get from your family members are the earliest and the most important messages that you probably will ever receive in your life. And how your parents communicate will really shape your attitude on other subjects in life. So other subjects on marriage. So if you have, let's say your mother and father are divorced and your mother says all men are evil and you should never get married, and then that's going to impact to some degree your view on marriage. So we can't get away from that. But there's some really good news, because even if you weren't nurtured in the most positive environment, it is absolutely possible to learn new ways of communicating so that you can create happier relationships in your life. So there's some good news here. That's why you're taking a class like this, because it provides the tools that you need in order to have healthier, happier relationships. So moving back to family communication, so we know that it's formative. So it plays a role in your development and how you relate to other people. And there's a particular theory, it's called attachment theory, and that argues that children develop bonds, either secure or insecure, with family members. And if you had insecure bonds with family members, you're much more likely to develop this insecure attachment to other people in your life. So if you engage in a romantic relationship, you're much more likely to believe that that person is going to leave you, or that person is going to reject you. So you're much more anxious in the relationship because you didn't have that secure relationship in your family. Now, versus the secure relationship in the family, and more secure relationships, kids are much more likely to communicate more openly. They're much more likely to be confident, and they're much more likely to develop greater intimacy with the partners and the people that they choose to have a romantic relationship with. So there's secure attachment theory, and insecure attachment theory. And so depending upon our family, we're more likely to develop either that anxiousness if it was insecure, or that confidence if it was more secure. And we also know that our family communication, it's very much role driven. And what that is, it's a set of expectations about how to communicate depending upon the role that you played in your family. So if your family saw you as being the troublemaker, you're kind of labeled as the troublemaker, and then you carry this with you throughout your life, and it kind of could potentially become a self-fulfilling prophecy, or your family labels you as the smart one, and then you see yourself as being really smart. So we talked about the self-fulfilling prophecy earlier in the semester, but it also plays a role in the communication in our families, and will continue unless there's something that we don't like about the role that was ascribed to us. If we don't like that role, we can change it, but it takes, number one, awareness, number two, the skill set, and number three, the ability to actually make some changes. And then finally, we know that family communication is involuntary. We do not get to choose our family. And for some of us, we're like, damn it, I wish I could choose my family, but we can't choose our family. So we know that our family, the web of our involuntary family connections, that it grows even more complex. You think childhood was complex, that family web grows even more complex as we get older. And moving on here to seeing families as systems. So when we look at families as a system, it's a group of interdependent individuals that interact and adapt together as a whole. So think about it like this. How are family systems interdependent? We are interdependent on each other. And as much as we may not like this, it's a reality. So if someone in your family is having a really bad day, it's really difficult for you to have a good day, because you are interconnected with them. You are interdependent on them. I apologize for the kitties in the background. They're getting ready to eat, and so they can be a little bit vocal. So, okay, so how else are family systems, how are we interdependent? Well, in one of the studies by social scientists, they reported that spouses reported higher marital quality when they were equally responsible for family tasks. Which shared task best predicted marital satisfaction? What do you think it is? So which shared task predicted best marital satisfaction? Child rearing. So taking part in raising your children. If you leave it all to the woman, or you leave it all to the man, or if it's a same-sex relationship and you leave it all to one person as opposed to the other person, that's going to create great marital dissatisfaction. In addition, another one that's pretty high up on the list is sharing in household responsibilities, in the cooking and the cleaning. So if one person is more likely to do that, much more likely to do that than the other person, that can create some problems and dissatisfaction in the relationship. Just saying. Next, family systems are manifested through communication. And what that means is that communication connects members of a family as if they were a complete system. So words that we use, and the way that we act, what we say to each other within our family, it's going to be unique through our family. So what you say within your family and how you say it within your family is going to be really unique to your family. And how another family communicates is going to be very unique to them. And that's how sometimes we have some misunderstandings, because in one family it might be quite all right to tease, and then in another family it's not okay to tease, and then those two families come together and you might have some problems, because one might see teasing as offensive and the other person might see it as a way of showing affection. In another way, family systems are nested, and what that means is that within every family there's going to be a subsystem operating. And in a traditional family, you might have a mother and a father, and they have their own unique relationship, and then the siblings have their own relationship. That's another system. And then maybe the cousins have another relationship, and then we have the supra system, like we had in the slide before this in Modern Family. And so you have the aunts and the uncles and the grandparents and the great grandparents. We have the super system. So beyond kinship, families are also part of the society in which they operate. For example, we know that when children grow up in violent environments, they tend to be much more anxious and have weaker social skills in adulthood. So we know that to be true of our families as well, and their communication. And then finally, families are more than the sum of their parts. So when you are looking at your family, and if you look at each person independently, they might act a certain way, but put them all together, that means that they're greater than the sum of their parts. So what does that mean? So think about it. How you are with your family, you might take on a role, and then you are a different way in another group with an entirely different family. So you as a family, you kind of take on your own personality. So think of it like that. Family systems are more than the sum of their parts. It's the personality that you take on as a group, because you yourself might not be how you are with your family. But when you're in your family, you might take on another persona, and that in your family has its own communication climate, its own personality, which might be different from your personality. And moving on to communication in families, we will look at communication patterns within families. So how families communicate can vary in two main ways. Number one, modes of conversation, and number two, conformity. So if you look right here, some families have a greater conversation orientation and a greater or lesser conformity orientation. So we'll move here to the next slide so that you can see this model of family patterns in communication. And what I'd like you to do is to kind of look at this model and to see where your family falls in this model. So if you were to look at this model here, we know that there's a high level of conversation, and it could be a high level of conformity. So what does that mean? Let's look at consensual families. So consensual families strive for a combination of high on openness, conversation, but also high on conformity. And we're going to use one example here in a second. Secondly, let's look at protective families. Protective families, they're very much low on conversation and high on conformity. So they really stress a relationship of obedience and conformity. In pluralistic families, they have ideas, they exchange them, but parents are not the final authority. The kids make their own decisions here. And then finally, laissez-faire, there really isn't any consistent norm, so there's little communication, really low conversation orientation, and low conformity orientation. So let's use the example that you live in a traditional family. You have a mother and a father, and you have a brother and a sister, and you are the daughter. So there's two daughters and one brother. So you want to get a tattoo. And in a consensual family, if you're from a consensual family, you are going to talk to them about it. You want to make sure that you have the conversation. Let's say you are 16 years old and you decided that you wanted to get a tattoo. So you're going to talk to your family, and you will have a conversation. You'll give your opinion, and your parents will give their opinion, and your brother and sister will give their opinion. But the bottom line is that your parents, if they say no, you're going to conform. So that's more of the consensual family. So they're going to conform. You're going to conform to what they say. Now, if you're in the pluralistic family, you're going to talk to them, and you're 16, same circumstance, and you say, hey, I want to get this tattoo. And everyone gives their opinion, so you all talk about it, but they're not the final authority. They allow you to make the decision. So in the pluralistic family, parents like to talk about, okay, this is what you're going to do. These are potential consequences of your actions, but you are going to make your own decisions. And so in a pluralistic family, they're much more likely to promote independence and free thinking in children. Oftentimes, children are very confident when being raised in this type of family. Now let's move over to the protective family. And the protective family, they are very much low on conversation, and they're very high on conformity. And so in your protective family, same thing, you want to get a tattoo, and your parents don't even want to hear it. They're like, no, end of the discussion. You must respect the hierarchy. And your father says no, so it is no. And so with the protective type of family, Younger people are much more likely to do things in secret because they feel that they can't come to their parents and have a conversation about something because they will be forced to conform, and their own ideas they feel like they are unable to express and be honest with their family. So they are much more likely to hide their true feelings and then to do things in secret. And then the last one is laissez-faire. And that's the family where there's no norms, there's little communication. So in this particular family, you might just come home and say, hey, I got a tattoo. And the parents are like, cool. Because it's just kind of like a hands-off approach to parenting. So one of the things to take away from this is we all come from a family in which there's one or the other that really takes precedence in how your family communicates. And in part, that might determine how you communicate later in life. Or maybe if you do come from a more protective family and you are more secretive about your personal thoughts and feelings, that might be part of the reason why. Maybe you don't want to be like that and you do want to change. You want to be more independent in your thinking and feel like you can voice your opinion to other people. You want to be more like the pluralistic style family. So these are things to consider. And again, you've got your communication toolbox to help you make some changes if you do want to make some changes. So in moving on to communication and friendships, so we know that our families, they are involuntary. We just have them. And our friends, though, are voluntary. So we get to choose our friends. So that's the silver lining in all of this. We get to choose our friends. So the different types of friendships that we develop throughout our lives are framed in three main ways. First, it's our youthful versus mature, the types of friends. So in play school, when you're a preschooler, you have a lot of friends and you have fun. You probably have zero empathy as a kid, but you're there to have fun with kids, with other kids. And one thing to understand is they're important, but they're not that important. And they become more important over time. As you move on into the teenage years, friends are extremely important, perhaps more important than the family is with regards to quality of your life. And then finally, moving on into the mature years, if you look in middle age, let's say you get married, you have children, your friends are still important, but one resource that competes for your attention is time. And sometimes you just don't have as much time for your friends in middle age. And then later in life, your friendships are extremely important. One of the things I talked about on the first or second slide was physical intimacy and closeness. As we get older and mature, especially into older age, the friends that we have left are extremely important to the quality of our life. Now moving on to long-term versus short-term. So you might have friends, you might have a few friends in your lifetime that you had from when you were maybe 10, 12, 13, 14, 15 years old. And let's say fast forward in life, you're 40 or 50, and you might still have a few of those friends, but oftentimes we don't have those friends. We have more short-term friends versus the long-term friends that are over the course of a lifetime. Some of the things that can affect whether or not your friendships are long-term or short-term is maybe you move and you don't share activities with that person anymore because you moved. Or maybe you had a change of heart with regards to religion, or you changed your values on some issues that were really important. So long-term versus short-term orientation is another type of friendship. And then finally is relationship-oriented versus task-oriented. With some friends, you're much more likely to self-disclose, to share your feelings. There's that reciprocity. And in other friendships, they're much more task-oriented, where you like doing things together and sharing activities together. So these are the main different types of friendships: youthful versus mature, long-term versus short-term, and relationship-oriented versus. And moving on to communication and romantic relationships. So in relationships, we have these romantic turning points, these relational turning points. So if you've ever been in a romantic relationship and you knew that you both wanted to take the relationship to the next level, there was something that precipitated that. There was this turning point in the relationship. Or maybe the person said something and then you said, I know it, this is the one. And also you're in a relationship for a long time and there's one event that happens, and it's not just this one event that caused it, but it's a series of events, but it's this one particular event, and then that can trigger the turning point in the relationship and contribute to the dissolution of that relationship. So all romantic relationships have turning points. At times you might have extreme intimacy and adventure in the relationship, and then the relationship can turn and perhaps become more serious, and it can turn again and become more task oriented. So we have all of these, we have different romantic turning points within our relationships. Moving on to our couples conflict styles. So within our romantic relationships, we have three main conflict styles. We have volatile, avoidant, and validating. In the volatile conflict style, the couples typically have intense, heated arguments, sometimes over really small issues. They raise their voices, they compete to hold the floor, and they make their cases really passionately. And in these conflicts for these couples, they're often seen more as contests to be won. Another style of conflict is avoidance. These are the couples who prefer to ignore issues rather than to confront them. They try to minimize disagreements to steer clear of any sensitive topics, and they like to acknowledge that they have conflicts, but they like to handle them really quickly, and unlike the volatile couples conflict styles, they handle them dispassionately. And then finally, we have validating. And validating is the couples conflict styles that our textbook would recommend. And these couples openly and cooperatively manage conflicts. When they have differences of opinion, they talk them out. They manage them in civil ways through a dialogue. And they do not deny their feelings, but rather they state their feelings. But again, they do it in a way so that they're not attacking the other person. They try to listen carefully to what the other person has to say, and they look for really collaborative ways to solve their problems. So that's the validating, and the authors of your textbook would say this is the ideal conflict style with regards to couples. Although John Gottman, who is a psychologist, said not necessarily, because some couples that are volatile have really intense highs and really intense lows, but they both enjoy that. So that is possible. And some people who avoid, they really avoid conflict so much that they just take the more pragmatic approach to a relationship and they enjoy that. He said what's more important in conflict and just in general, the communication in romantic relationships, that there must be 5 positive things said to every one negative, or 5 positive acts to every one negative act. So he said that is really more accurate in determining whether or not a couple will continue the relationship and live in greater harmony in the relationship. And finally, our last slide, you thought it would never come, Languages of Love by Dr. Gary Chapman. So this is really, it's fairly new. And when I say fairly new, the last 10 years or so, it's a way of understanding the love language that you speak and that your partner speaks. And they even now have books, Languages of Love of Children, because if the parent speaks one language and then the child speaks another, the child's love tank isn't filled. So let's look at the 5 different languages of love. Words of affirmation. And this person needs to hear words of praise. They need to hear that they're doing a good job, that they look good, that they sound intelligent. So they need to be affirmed on a regular basis. The next love language is quality time. So this person wants your undivided attention. They want to spend time with you, not necessarily in quantity, but the time that they do spend with you, they want you to be off your phone. They want you to be nodding and listening and paying attention. They want to have a dialogue, a conversation. They want reciprocity. So they want quality time. The third is gifts. So some people express love in the form of a gift, and it could be small gifts. If someone is going over to someone else's house, a person that values gifts might believe that they need to bring a bottle of wine, or they might need to bring a dessert, or they need to bring a gift of some sort to show their love and to show their appreciation. To another person, if that's not their love language, they may not bring the gift. The fourth one is acts of service. So some people express their love through acts of service. And that could be in the form of fixing your car. Your loved one might fix your car, or they might clean the house, or they might take the dog for a walk, or they might clean the litter box, or they might take care of a bill that you hadn't paid. So they're providing an act of service, and that's their way of demonstrating love to you. And then the last one is physical touch. So physical touch is literally physical touch. So for you to feel loved, you need to be touched by your partner. You like to hold hands, you like to kiss, you like to be close to them on the couch, you like to snuggle, and that's physical touch. So we usually have a primary and a secondary. And then some people are really high on all of them because they need it all. So what I'd like you to do is make sure that for the discussion post that you take the assessment and to best determine what your love language is. And the whole point in understanding this is oftentimes we butt heads with our partner because we may not speak the same love language, and you're doing your best and they're doing their best, but you never seem to meet in the middle because you don't fully understand how that person is expressing their love to you. So if your love language is words of affirmation and their love language is acts of service, and they're not telling you how great you look and how intelligent you are and how grateful they are for your relationship, but rather they're cleaning out your car and they're fixing it for you. And you might think, well, that's nice, but I want to know that you're into me. So what we can do is recognize what our love language is. And if you don't have the same love language as your partner, that you try to adapt to what their love language is. And even though it's not going to be instantaneous for you and it's not going to come natural to you at first, over time you will be able to show them love in a way that they can best receive love. So we covered a lot of different things today in this chapter with regards to communication in interpersonal relationships. We know that intimacy has 4 main dimensions. We know that our family of origin, how they communicated, contributed to how we communicate later in life. But we also know if we did not like that there are tools and skills that we can develop and that we can put into practice to change communication patterns. And we also learned about different communication in friendships and also in our romantic relationships. So we covered a lot, and we only have a couple more chapters to go. If you have any questions about what I discussed in the lecture today, please don't hesitate to contact me. Ask away.